driver is registered on the platform. So we spoke before about essentially the requirements that are necessary for a vehicle to come onto the platform and a driver. So on the vehicle side, number one, we want to make sure that the vehicles that are on the platform are roadworthy and appropriate to be driven. So this involves checks of the roadworthiness certificate, vehicle registration, etc. But we also, on top of that, require vehicles to be inspected regularly. Now, secondly, in order for the driver to be on the platform, as mentioned, there are document requirements. There are also screening checks. And as Jessica mentioned, periodically there will be real-time ID checks to validate that the driver is the person who they say they are. Now, let's say you're a rider. You've requested your Uber ride. There are a few features that come even before you get into that car. So one of them is that ability to be able to see the driver's name, the car color, the car make, the car license plate, and to be able to validate those before you get into the car. And as mentioned in response to the other question, if any of those things don't match, if it's not the right car, if the wrong person shows up, you should not get into the car. And please immediately report that to us. But that's a safety feature, something that wasn't available before technology. And even before you get in the car, you know who it's supposed to be, right? We also have the ability for drivers and riders to communicate, whether it's by phone or through message, to also be able to make sure that you're being picked up in a safe spot where the rider wants to be picked up. So now you're on the trip. So one of the key things that technology provides is this GPS tracking and the ability for this trip to be tracked. Now, how is that helpful? In a couple of ways. Number one, both riders and drivers, you have the option to do what's called Share My Trip, which means you can sort of send a link of your trip to your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, whoever, a loved one, so that they can see where you are going along that trip and have that comfort that they know where you are at any time. Right? Initially we had this feature for riders, but now we have it for drivers as well, which I think is great. And then in the unfortunate instance that a safety incident or something happens on the trip, this tracking means that we have information that we can share with police or law enforcement or what so have you with respect to who was where at a certain time. So that's while you're on the trip. Now your trip ends, and hopefully you and your driver give each other 5 stars, right? So part of it is this feedback. But if something doesn't go so well, through the ratings we get a sense that something didn't go so well. Maybe the driver wasn't as professional as you expected, or maybe the rider wasn't acting in a courteous or respectable manner as well. And through that rating, we get that feedback, which we can use to determine if someone has violated the community guidelines and needs to have their access removed from the application. And it's not just the ratings, it's also feedback about a specific issue you may have had. Oh, my driver took the wrong route, etc. Oh, my rider was rude. You can always provide that feedback. And then what's key is also this 24/7 support. So you have the option at any time to write in the application to report an issue that you may have. While on a trip, a driver can also access emergency support. And where incidents are critical, we have incident response team who will respond in minutes to any queries that may come up. So again, as mentioned, we're constantly innovating. There are always new features being added on. And I think one more that I'll highlight is
emergency button, the real-time check as well.
Exactly. And one more that was launched last year is the driving hour limits. So this is a feature that not all riders are aware of, but drivers will be aware of, and I'll speak about it just briefly. Driving hour limits is something that we as a company introduced because we were looking at research in terms of, when somebody's been driving for a long time, what happens, right? And the research that we saw showed that once somebody's been driving for more than, say, 12 hours at a stretch, their ability to drive actually becomes impaired. And it can be dangerous, in some cases to the extent of, if somebody's drowsy or, impaired. So for us, what we decided is to take a stance. Of course, we'd love people driving on our platform all day and all night, but it's actually not safe. And the incidence of safety incidents increases after a certain period. So what we have done is in the app essentially created a 12-hour time limit where drivers cannot be having sort of been in continuous motion driving for more than 12 hours. After that 12 hours, we'll say, please take a 6-hour break. and after that break, they're allowed back on. But again, that's another, I think, illustration of our commitment to safety for folks on the platform.